Welcome everyone to this week's Family Law Now live presentation on technology and law firm security, a very crucial area in the legal profession. We have the pleasure of having technology and cybersecurity experts, Dr. Ori Sasson and James Del Genio, joining Russell for today's discussion. Thank you to our speakers and all of our audience members again for tuning in. So today our speakers will be sharing very valuable insights into tools and strategies, best practices to best safeguard your law firms and mitigate cybersecurity risks in order to protect your firm and clients. And they'll be focusing on the following topics: physical site security, passwords, Wi-Fi, computers, mobile devices, remote access, firewalls, email and internet filtering, backups, and data breaches. And as always, we'll reserve some time for Q&A, and our speakers will answer as many questions as possible throughout the presentation. If you haven't already submitted your questions, you're welcome to do so by clicking on the Q&A icon on your Zoom bar and typing your questions or comments through there. I'd also like to note for our Ontario lawyers that are attending today that this program has been accredited by the Law Society of Ontario and contains 1 hour of professionalism content. Now I'm going to take some time to share some words about our panelists' experience and expertise. So first we have Dr. Ori Sasson, who is the founder of S2T Unlocking Cyberspace, a cyberspace intelligence firm helping organizations worldwide derive insights from data online and from other sources. And Ori holds a PhD in computer science from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem with specialization in machine learning. And he has over a quarter of a century of experience in the domains of technology and cyber intelligence. Formerly, he was an assistant professor at the Singapore Management University, and he is also the author of numerous books and research papers. Next, we have James Del Genio, who is the founder of the 5ofus.com Corporation and boasts a career of over 25 years as a consultant specializing in technology, cybersecurity, and legal security. We've had the privilege of having Jim as our trusted advisor at our firm for much of his career. And Jim uses his knowledge and expertise to safeguard sensitive legal data and ensures that our tools and practices are at the forefront of the latest technology to optimize the security and protection of our firm and our clients. And we always know we're in good hands with Jim. And last but not least, we have Russell, who is the founder and senior partner at Russell Alexander Collaborative Family Lawyers. And with 25 years of experience, he uses his knowledge and expertise to serve his clients in all aspects of family law. He uses his experience to create unique solutions for each client to enable them and their families to move forward while supporting them through the transition of divorce and separation. Russell has also written 4 books on the legal profession and offers his experience in speaking at conferences on collaborative practice, marketing, technology, and the law. So on that note, I'm going to now give the floor to Russell, Ori, and Jim.
Thank you for those kind words, Shannon. Let's run our first poll. First thing we're going to talk about while this poll is up is physical site security. And sometimes when you think about data breaches, you're not really thinking about your physical location. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. But let's see what our audience is made up of today. Family lawyer, 48%, lawyer in a different profession, 35%. Tech security professional, 4%, professional in other field, 9%, and other. Thank you for that. You can submit the other in the Q&A box. So physical site security. We did a security audit at my firm just prior to the pandemic. And we can throw our next slide up here, Shannon. And as part of that, we started implementing different security protocols at the firm. So prior to the pandemic, it was common to see a number of people come into the office. And Jim and I were talking about this last week, how if you have a new receptionist, somebody can walk in like they own the place and just walk past reception. But we'd have clients coming in, UPS, couriers, walk-ins, people looking to set an appointment, lost people come into our office looking for directions. Some office locations, there could be homeless people or beggars come in and looking for help. Could be just strangers, and it could be people up to mischief coming in to look at stealing something. So you want to be mindful of your site security. next slide, Shannon. When we did our audit, one of the recommendations was to actually secure the physical computers in a cage. So if somebody did get into your office, they couldn't get to your data. But we introduced door locks. Our doors are locked all the time. Our staff have panic buttons, so if there's an incident, they can call the authorities. We have alarm systems that we implemented, safe words that we use in case there's an incident and we're on the phone, we can queue somebody up or let them know there's a problem at the office. Obviously, we did the thermal checks during COVID, and we did our security audit where we looked at the physical footprint of the office, thought about how can we make it more secure and secure our client data. So that's just something I want you to be mindful of when you're thinking about data breaches. Did you guys want to add anything to any of those tips on site security, Ori or Jim? Okay, so let's go to our next poll, and then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes. So second poll question is, have you ever been hacked? Yes, no, or not sure. We'll give everybody a few minutes to answer that. And while we're waiting for the audience to answer, I'm going to ask you a question, Ori, that came in. What role does employee training and awareness play in strengthening a law firm's overall security?
So basically, the employee training is a key thing, because when we look at cybersecurity, we can think about it like being comprising of three different parts. One is systems, one is people, one is processes, right? So if the people are not standing guard against all these things, the best tools will not help, because we have to give the employees access to the data, right? So they have access to the data means that if they're not careful, they might somehow give this access to somebody else. So I believe that the training is a key thing, especially as the risk landscape is changing all the time. So it's really a key component here.
You don't really think about it, but if they don't, just something as basic as email scams, right? If you don't train them to recognize this as a suspicious email, they're going to be clicking on it, and you can be compromised pretty quickly, I assume.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, let's go to our audience and find out their experience. Yes, 22%. That's fairly significant. No, 39%. Not sure. That's right. You may have been hacked and they haven't asked you for anything or told you that you're hacked. You may be hacked right now. So almost 40%. So interesting answers there. Passwords. Ori, two-factor identification policies. What are your recommendations when it comes to passwords?
Right. So
I guess this is step one, right?
Yeah. So I think in the area of passwords, right? So the purpose of passwords is to prevent access to important data by unauthorized actors. So the way that most of these breaches happen is actually by the threat actors somehow getting access to the password. And this can happen in one of a few ways. One way is they could just guess it, right? So let's say I use as my password is my son's birthday or my son's name or something, and then they can guess it. Another thing is password or credential stuffing, which means they basically get it from other data breaches. So let's say I'll give, for example, for myself, right? Years ago, what I would do is I would use a very unique password for important stuff like the bank, but I'd have the same password for everything else, which was not important. And what happened is that this same password was included in data breaches, which were released even publicly, people could download this. And I used the same password for my Spotify account. So what happened is that somebody actually got access to my Spotify account using this, and then it took me a few days to get access back to it. So the point about this is really that if we use the same password in many places, once it's leaked, then people can reuse it. So how do we protect against that? So the most standard way to do that, first of all, is to have a complex passwords, a unique passwords, different one for each system. Changing our passwords frequently. A lot of times we can have policies for that. The second thing is to use 2FA. So 2FA is a very standard thing today where you'd have an SMS authenticator app or something like that to get another confirmation that you actually are the person you claim to be. And for more, if you want more complex security, we may want to use something called MFA, which is multi-factor authentication. Sometimes, both SMS and the authenticator app, but usually it will be using biometrics, geolocation-based, another password, and so there are different ways to do it. The main idea there is just to make it difficult for the attacker. The challenge for us is, as we make it difficult for the attacker, it's also more difficult for the legitimate user, right? So that's where we need to strike a balance.
Yeah, Jim, you want to add anything to passwords?
No, I think Ori covered it pretty comprehensively. I think, and like he said, is as effective as two-factor and multi-factor authentication can be, sometimes we can go overboard and make it so difficult that it almost becomes unusable for the user. But I think, Ori touched on it, and you touched on it in your opening remarks about physical security.
Yeah.
Common sense goes a long way. And part of the reason some of these things have been introduced, like two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication have been introduced, is because people would write their passwords on a post-it and stick it on their screen, or they'd tell their coworker what their password is. And
stick it on your screen and they steal your computer and your password's right there.
Yeah, it's right there for them.
Yeah.
So as much as technology and people's creativity can stop this stuff, and the nice thing about something other than an authenticator, like a biometric, is that it's related to the person, so it helps you identify the actual person. The problem is, like with any technology, over time people find ways around it, and in the end it still requires a lot of common sense and training of the end users to help them be aware and to have an understanding of the significance of why we protect the data.
I remember Ashley Madison got hacked, the dating site or cheating site, whatever they call it. And they published the most common passwords. And it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 password. It was the most basic coded password, right? But what do you do about convenience, right? It's nice to have the same password for every device, because then you're not meddling around trying to remember what the password was. Is there any quick fixes to that? Do you guys have any apps or tips for that one?
No.
No.
I guess the answer, and Ori mentioned it, and in his example of Spotify, is even though it may be convenient to have the same password for everything, you are really putting yourself at risk.
Yeah, right. Then everything's going to get compromised. All right, great tips. So if next, we all have a duty of confidentiality as lawyers to preserve our clients' privacy and data. I think we put up rule 3.3 of the rules of professional conduct that cover that off. So if we're hacked, who should you advise? Now you have lots of choices here. Your clients, law society, law pro, IT, tell no one, pay the ransom. It depends on the extent of the hack or other. So let's see what our audience thinks. If a law firm is compromised, who are we required to inform? So your client, 64%, law society, 50%, law pro or your insurer, 68%, IT support, 73%, and it depends on the extent of the hack, 45%. Now, I think you're involved in something like this, Jim, where the insurer said don't pay the ransom. Is that right?
Yeah. You have to remember that anybody that's hacked you, if it's a ransomware thing, these people don't have integrity.
Right.
So to make the assumption that they're going to give you the right encryption key, and in some cases they may, but the problem is the people that encrypted your data, all they want is money. They don't really care about you or your data or what happens to you or your business. They just want money. And if you give them money, then they've gotten what they want. So there really is no incentive for you, for them to give you the key to unlock your data. And that's I think in the case I was referring to, the insurance company had obviously had experience with it. and recommended to the client that they do not pay the ransom,
Right.
regardless of what, the amount was. And I think that's, in a lot of cases wise. I think in some, depending on the circumstance of the person that's been ransomed, and the need for the data, they have to make their own decision and choices. But they also need to be aware that, it's not like the guy that ransomed is honest or has any integrity.
Right.
So the expectation that they will, do what they say is not reasonable.
And I guess I hate to say this, the correct answer might be it depends on the extent of the hack, because you may have been hacked, but your client's data could still be secure, right?
Yeah, there's lots of different kinds of hacks. It doesn't necessarily have to be ransomware. It could have been, they could have had access to one staff's device. They could have still, it could have been a laptop left in a vehicle and stolen.
Right.
And so if there's no client data on it, well, then it's, you don't have to notify your clients because you haven't been breached in terms of client data.
Right.
That doesn't mean that the person whose laptop, and it's happened where they were afraid to tell their employer.
Yeah.
They do need to identify that. And it's the same, a long time ago had a customer who was ransomed. And this was, when Bitcoin was, I think, about $300 a Bitcoin, and that's all they wanted was one Bitcoin. But the problem was that we had restored the data, and the next day the data was corrupt again. And we restored the data, and the next day it was corrupt again. The person in the office that had gone to a specific website and brought the ransomware in was afraid to tell anybody.
Right.
So it cost us, a couple of days of time to identify where this was coming from. By the time we had, identified it and shut it down, it had cost them 2 days of data because we had to restore, each time. And certain amounts of the data were being lost. So again, they needed to be upfront and admit to their employer that they had, that they had done this. The problem was they were going to a site that everybody knew they shouldn't be going to.
Yeah.
And they didn't want, and they were embarrassed and didn't want to admit that. But, the cost of the firm was, could have been worse. But at the same time, they had to pay for my firm's time to restore everything twice, and the time to track down and isolate the problem.
And that employee might not even,
could have been avoided.
that employee might not even have known.
They knew.
Okay.
In this case, they knew. Now, in some cases, they might not. You're right, and that's fair. But in this case, that employee knew and was just embarrassed and was afraid of the consequences of admitting to their employer.
So, Ori, what's your take on this? Law firm gets hacked. Who should they be reporting to, if anybody?
So I think as you said, it really depends on the extent. So we need to understand the word hack could mean a lot of things.
Right.
Even if we talk about ransomware specifically, I think there could be like two scenarios here, broadly speaking. One is where the data is encrypted, right? And you're not able to access it, right? And then the ransom is about, are we going to give you back the data? And as mentioned, if you have a backup, that's like, you don't have any problem anymore. And, if you use Google Drive or these kind of stuff, they have backups built in. There's another variant of ransomware today, which is very popular, which is if they manage to take away your data, right? To make a copy of your data, they will threaten to release the data. So imagine you have like your client data. It's not about having access to it or not. They will publish it, and then everybody in the world can access it, or possibly your, the legal team of the whatever counterparty they have. And I think that is like, I think the worst kind of risk. So I believe it will depend on the case, because it's also possible that you have a hack and there's no impact, like they just breached something, they went in, they didn't take anything, so it's like a thief coming into your house and then walking right out, right? So I'm not an expert on the law, like what is your
Right.
like duty in terms of professional conduct, but what I would say is that if there's evidence of data being taken out, then I suppose you need to minimally inform your IT. I mean, for any breach, anything, you probably need to put to your IT support. If you have cyber insurance, I guess you need to call them as well, whether to inform the clients or authorities or law society. I guess it will depend on the extent of the hack, because this is not reversible, right? So once you say, look, I had this problem, right, I guess it doesn't look very good on you. On the other hand, I'm not an expert on what's the implication. So I think the main thing is, though, how do we create a situation where we actually know what is happening, right? It's very common for these breaches that people don't even know about them for like months and
Right.
so on. So one thing is to just create a situation where we are able to kind of understand what's happening with our stuff.
I would err on the side of caution and report it to the insurer. They can help mitigate any issues, and maybe there was no mistake or loss, but that at least they're put on notice. And if you're not sure about the Law Society, just call the practice advisory and get their guidance and tell them what you know, and they'll help you through it. So let's talk about Wi-Fi for a moment. And this is obviously a weak link in a lot of law firms. If you think about a lawyer's day in life, we could be going to hotels, we could be going to conferences. Oftentimes we're in airports. We often see Wi-Fi that's available to the public. It could be in the name of the airport or the hotel where the conference is being held. But it could be one of these pineapple devices where this is the middleman. They're creating a Wi-Fi cloud and creating a name that looks like it's legitimate. You log in without a password and you think it's free, and now they've got access to your system. And you see this even in malls like Yorkdale Mall. People go to Starbucks to have a coffee and use the Wi-Fi, and it says Starbucks Wi-Fi. It could be one of these devices. It's got nothing to do with Starbucks. So our policy is never to use public Wi-Fi. It needs to be secured and you need to authenticate it. But, and I think it's a weak spot for a lot of law firms and their employees. But Ori, what do you think of the Wi-Fi? What's your tips and practices for our audience today?
Yeah, so I think you hit it right on the nail there. I mean, the challenge with Wi-Fi, especially, I mean, it is improving all the time, but the basic thing is, when you connect to a network, you don't really know what it is. If you go to the Starbucks, it could be really Starbucks or some guy just putting a pineapple device and calling it Starbucks. So because of that, it's always better not to connect to unknown Wi-Fi. It is true that today many websites will not allow hackers to use this device to steal like the most basic thing. Like you won't be able to impersonate Google or something because of like different security measures, but at the basic level there is a lot of risk. By the way, there's other risks for Wi-Fi even in the office, right? If we configure the network and use like a out of the box, they have some password, and then other people can actually hack into our office Wi-Fi. So in both these cases, I think it's critical to have this kind of hygiene where we don't connect to networks that we don't know about, even if there's a cost of using the cellular connection or waiting until we access something more secure. And in terms of our own office network, also making sure that it is secure, that we use encryption, that we hide the SSID, for example, the name of the network, so people cannot like try to connect into it. And if we allow clients or visitors to have a guest network, ideally it's a separate network, and we don't like give them password to our actual work network, because that creates a risk.
Yeah, and they always ask, right? We have guest networks in our office, but they want to get connected. Jim, any Wi-Fi tips and tricks?
No, the guest Wi-Fi we use is Ori mentioned a separate network, but it's always ironic that I get the call from one of your staff saying I can't get to any data, and it's because they've gone to the staff or to the guest Wi-Fi instead of the staff one, which is what we want. But at the same time, you talked earlier again about education and training,
Right.
and you get a new receptionist or whatever. The last thing you want is them giving out to one of your clients the private Wi-Fi password and not instead of the guest one.
Right.
Um,
If it's their
those-
first, second day, they may not know, right? They just
Yeah.
can't say, yeah.
Yeah. And again, training and being aware. One of the things that we as IT people have the luxury of doing for the most part is keeping track of who is connecting to the network and watching for suspicious activity on the Wi-Fi networks and seeing what devices are there. When somebody brings a new cell phone in that we don't recognize, reaching out and saying, who had the new Pixel,
Yeah.
because we didn't know about that.
Remember when
those-
we were having problems with the connection, like the speed of the network? Somebody was watching movies and YouTube
Yeah.
and Netflix at the office and slowing our network down. It's like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. But all right, let's go back to our audience. Thank you for those tips, guys. And ask another poll question. For our audience, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can today. Does your firm allow you to use your own device, phone, tablet, computer? Give everybody a chance to answer that. We're going to go to an audience question right now. This one's for you, Jim. What are the most common cybersecurity threats facing law firms today? And what steps can we take to mitigate them effectively?
Education.
Right.
And you've talked about it, and I can't emphasize it enough. Aside from the stuff that your IT person should be doing, that we're going to talk about, things like the firewalls and backups and all of that, people's awareness is critical. Whether it's emails, going to websites, whether it's physical security and somebody walking in and saying, oh, I'm here to fix this, and they have no idea, and they walk into the server room. All of those things require an awareness and education of your staff, that these things happen and that you need to be aware of them and be diligent in policing them. So as much as you could say, well, right now, probably the flavor of the month in terms of causing grief is an attack on emails, whether they're with, Microsoft 365 or whoever you're using, and, people sending links that or attachments that they want you to click on, which is, a huge vulnerability.
It's so hard. You're getting, 100, 200 messages a day. It's almost mechanical to click on it, right? You need that pause and think, okay, does this seem suspicious? Because the email address is masked, but it looks like it's the email address, right?
Yeah, and they are very, they can be very sophisticated and look very, it's like the phone call that you get that says, this is the CRA, Canada Revenue Agency coming to get you, and if you don't pick up, you're going to go to jail. Well, those kinds of things happen all the time, or the boss wants you to go to the local drugstore and get 10, scratch credit cards or whatever they are and rush them over to, some of it sounds funny.
This is
but-
funny because this happened in my firm, and our associate went out and bought the cards. And now we have to tell new team members, I'm not going to ask you for Apple gift cards. Don't buy me anything, right? But the CRA one, everybody was getting that for a while. That's a revenue agency, and people were scared that, they hadn't paid their taxes. So
we had one, and you guys have probably all seen it, the email that comes across, we know you're watching porn, and we're going to show everybody we secretly watched you watching porn, and we're going to show all your friends and everybody in so you better pay us.
We've got your camera roll. We're going to reveal your pictures.
And the truth is, they know, these guys know human nature, and they know what to exploit. So it requires diligence and, and like we said, training and a conscious effort not to be taken in.
All right. Quick question for you, Ari. But before we do that, let's see what our poll results are. Using your own device, about 40% yes, 20% no. Hybrid, 33%, and other. They can put it in the Q&A. Thank you, audience, for answering. For Wi-Fi, does a VPN router help? Audience question. Ori?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the thing to understand, right, when we go through, if we use a VPN, it means that whoever's, even somebody controlling the Wi-Fi is not able to actually see what our traffic consists of. So in a way, it helps us to overcome it. I would think there might be a bit of a challenge, like you're connecting and only then you turn on the VPN. I mean, the VPN cannot be turned on before you're connected to the Wi-Fi, but technically a lot of the risk is taken away when we're using a VPN to connect.
And that's a virtual private network. That's what it
Yeah.
stands for. Okay. So computers, bring your own device or don't bring your own device. The security audit we went through said, don't let people use their own personal devices, whether they're laptops or phones. It's difficult because lawyers are in court and need their phones, and oftentimes don't have a second phone. But the benefit of having it all on our system is computers provided by the firm is we can wipe them out remotely. Should be lost or stolen or compromised. The drawback is getting them back from your employees if they're no longer with you. And I'd estimate it's almost $10,000 to set up a new employee with their own devices. You've got the device itself, you got to buy, $3-4 grand for a good one. The software you got to load, and then you have to pay somebody like Ori, the Jim, to set it up to your network. So I think you're quickly approaching $10,000. And if you have 5, 10, or 20 employees, it's a pretty huge expense. But I think the safest route is to have the firm provide the device and be able to wipe them out and control the data. But what's your take on this, Jim? What would your recommendation be?
My recommendation is always that the company provide the devices, just because there are so many things and technology changes so fast. There are so many things that we can't control, that by taking control and dealing with what's on the device, and everything from laptops to phones, having laps have built-in firewalls, as well as the firewall that they're behind when they're at their home, and all of those things, or when they're on the road. The problem with bring your own devices and with people's personal devices often is putting personal data on those devices. And again, goes back to training and everything else, but it boils down to, this is a device for you to do your job with. It is not a personal device. It's not a even though it, maybe an iPhone, and you've taken 100 pictures, personal pictures on it. Be aware that, for the security of the firm, in the event that that phone is stolen or lost or whatever, we wipe the phone, you're going to lose the stuff. And if it's personal stuff to you, you're losing it. And they need to have an understanding and of what is expected when they're given those devices. Just the same as there must be an understanding if they're using a personal device for something as simple as email, that in order to have access to company data, i.e. the email that they're, in our case, for some of our customers, realize that as soon as you connect, you're giving us the authority to wipe the device.
Yeah.
And since it's yours and we're not backing it up, you're giving us the authority to wipe all that personal information and your personal contacts and all that stuff that we don't really care or know about. You're giving, by connecting to the office's data, you're giving us consent to wipe that in the event that we need to.
So those photos of your European vacation are going to be gone because we need to secure the network.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, that's in some cases, firms leave it up to the lawyers and to decide. The problem, in the old days, I guess not so long ago, when we issued BlackBerries to everybody and had a BES server in the back end and had total control and lockdown of the device and everything else, people complained. They wanted iPhones and they wanted other devices other than the BlackBerries. And eventually, the voice of the mass got loud enough that, firms said, okay, you want an iPhone, fine. But then again, it became the same issue of, well, you give us access. In order to give you that access, will, require the permission and the access to delete it if there is a need to do that. And in that case, we've had lawyers decide that, okay, well, I'm going to keep the firm device and have my own personal device, which in a lot of ways makes perfect sense, even though people don't like to carry two cell phones around. But that's, it is a balance. It's the same as people. In the past, we've had people back up their iPhones and their Samsungs to their desktop in the office.
Yeah.
And we had to explain, one, that they have no expectation that we're going to back up their data with the firm data.
Right.
So if their desktop or their laptop crashes and we recover it from, they're losing their personal data.
Yeah. That's a great lead in to mobile devices, because that's exactly what we're talking about. So Ori, what's your take on personal devices, and what's your advice for mobile devices?
So for personal devices in general, I think obviously if you really want to be secure, it has to be not bringing your own device. Obviously, people may prefer to have their own devices, and it's also a cost, like you mentioned. But the challenge is that if we allow bring your own device, we may have like a lot of different types of devices, and then it will be very difficult to secure this, especially because it's not only about their data, it's also about what software do they install, right? So if a guy has his own phone, he installs some, let's say the person is from China, install some, I don't know, some chat software from China, suddenly you would have a different risk than if you don't have it. And so I think this would be the main thing. So as we talk about mobile devices, I think this is a key component in any working professional's life. And especially if we talk about lawyers, you need to go to court, you need to communicate with clients and with colleagues. So obviously a lot of these things would be on a mobile platform, a mobile device. The same pervasive use all over your workday also means that there's a lot of risk, right? So there's a lot of data there. The device can, if you're using, by the way, using it for non-work related, you can have a lot of distractions there. It could be a source of attacks as well, like phishing and stuff like that. I think another risk on the device is that the screen limitation means you will not see exactly what's happening. Like what you mentioned, you have an email coming in, it looks like it's from me, but actually somebody else with another email address, but you don't really have enough screen real estate to manage that. So because of all these things, I think the main thing about mobile device security is, number one, if possible, to use allow this remote wipe capability in case it's lost or compromised in any other way. Secondly, if the firm is big enough to support that, maybe to have like mobile device management, even, so basically to remotely manage the devices and allow you to control what's installed on them and so on and so forth. And lastly, stuff we talked about, like 2FA, VPNs, encryption, backups, all this will allow us a better fighting chance in case there's any problem.
All right, so let's get into remote access. What are your tips here, Ori? What are your recommendations for our audience? Okay, so when we say remote access, to me, it would mean two different things, right? One is we're talking about people working from home, working from the road, and they access data in the office. Another thing would be that we have an IT vendor and we allow him to access our environment. So for both of these, I think we need to be super careful. So one thing is to make sure that all access is highly secure, using a VPN, using a password, using some sort of multi-factor authentication. This is to ensure that the person who's accessing any resource is the right person, and this will be the first line of defense against any data leak. The use of virtual private networks, which means that all the data is encrypted throughout, but also that even though I'm in the hotel Wi-Fi, I'm actually
in the local network of the company. So this will allow us to access things securely, but without too much hassle. I think the last thing about remote access to me would be really having access control, meaning limited only to whoever has to have it, right? Because it might be very convenient to give it to everyone, but as we limit it, I think we'll have better fighting chance in it.
All right, so let's talk about firewalls. What are they and what should we be doing, Jim?
Well, what's easy? Basically, it's a wall, software and hardware usually, that's blocking certain kinds of traffic and allowing other kinds of internet traffic in and out of it. In the older days, and they're everywhere. There's one, in offices. Probably everybody's home network has one of some sort, whether it's provided by the phone or the telco provider who's giving you your internet, or whether you have your own. There is a firewall on every Windows PC. So essentially, what they're doing for us is they are controlling what kind of traffic comes in and out, and can keep track of where the traffic is going to and coming from. In terms of what we do, for the most part, we have over the years tightened up and tightened up and tightened up to the point where now we essentially don't allow incoming traffic. Now, what that doesn't mean traffic can't come in, because when you open a browser, when you want to read an email, the traffic is coming in, but it's been initiated by the user on the inside of that firewall. So when you open up your Outlook and you go to read an email, you're sending a request out from behind the firewall out to the server and requesting that data. It's not somebody outside trying to sneak in without you requesting that data. Having said that, that doesn't mean you're not vulnerable. Even through a firewall, you are. Like Ori mentioned, reading clicking on something in an email that you shouldn't is, in fact, making the firewall useless because you're now initiating something. But also, having said that, what we've learned over time is that, and Ori mentioned it, those attacks can come from unexpected places. And in one case, it was from a supplier of a software provider. Actually, in more than one case, where a firm is using a certain particular software vendor, and they've requested access to do maintenance or upgrade, whatever, on a timely basis, and leaving that particular port open was a vulnerability, or they had a vulnerability. The thing to remember, I guess, about firewalls is because they're everywhere, and because you're interconnected, and we've talked about VPNs through firewalls and all of that stuff, encrypting data between one place and the other. It only takes the weakest link to cause a breach, whether that link is in the office or at home or at Tim Hortons or Starbucks or wherever it is. If somebody has access to your data and they're on a weak link and somebody can get through, then that's a breach. And that can, so in terms of firewalls, over time, we've learned that we don't allow vendors access anymore. If they need something, then either we put something in place that makes a call out that we have control over, or they don't have access. In the old days, we would open up ports like crazy. Oh, well, let's make up a port and we'll use that and give you access to something, change things to this port. We've stopped doing that because people's ability to get through firewalls has gotten more sophisticated, like everything else. And so we don't, all of the stuff that we do in terms of management and access to machines from our standpoint is initiated internally out to servers that, so that we have control, and that way we can shut off all the ports. Having said that, over time, and as you mentioned with, the change in the way the office worked going to, in COVID, at one time we had everybody using remote access through an SSL, a secure connection. Over time, we phased some of that out and changed it to VPN access only. And over time, especially with COVID, we, moved things to the cloud. So there was no reason to get into the office anymore.
Right.
Other than buy a VPN to do some specific things that probably whether it was printing, whatever, that weren't related to client data. But that, from a recommendation to all law firms, again, it almost goes back to policy, but it requires, a serious look at why you need to open anything up on a firewall anymore. Because for the most part, you don't need to.
For email, internet, and filtering, 2 minutes or less, what should we be thinking about, Jim?
Again, don't think that that filters and spam filters can catch everything, because they can't. We have filtering through Microsoft, we have filtering through Bitdefender, in your case, as an example. They're good and they do a lot, but they're not perfect, and they probably never will be. So it requires diligence on the end users. But at the same time, as we tighten up and filter more, there's also the risk of filtering legitimate stuff. And you've probably had other firms call, because all of this filtering and proactive looking at email, it could be simply an image in a signature that is blocked from a particular firm. So, it requires conscious effort, one, to be checking your junk mail, two, to be flagging things that you get as spam. Don't just delete them, mark them, check off block and mark as spam, so that your filters learn and and know not to take stuff from that domain or that user again.
I didn't
All
know
of
what
those
those flags were. So you give it a red flag, the email program's not going to give you any more of those messages.
from that, well, in the old days, you could say yes. Now things are getting more sophisticated,
Right,
and
okay.
they find ways around those things. But the other thing is, most of the bad actors out there change their email constantly anyway. So blocking a particular domain means that next week they have a different domain.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So we're running a poll here. Are you backing up your systems and your data? Let's see what our answers are there. A couple quick questions that are coming in. Thank you, everybody, for sending in your questions. How risky is it to use Google suggested randomly generated secure passwords? Safe, not safe? Do you guys recommend that? And that ties in our online password manager is a good way to secure your passwords. What are your tips on those two? Ori?
So to me, the Google generated password is okay, because it will be random, right? So nobody can like guess it, because it's super long and uses a lot of weird characters. I think the password manager, on a basic level, it's a good thing, because then you can use these. Imagine using the Google random password, right? There's no way you're going to remember it, right? And if you want to write it yourself on a piece of paper or something, it's going to be too long. I think the challenge with these password managers, that once in a while, one of them is breached as well, and then suddenly all your passwords are suddenly out there. So I personally find it a bit difficult to take that risk, because it seems but it is a really tough question, because as we need to have more and more passwords in different systems, we need to remember them, we need to change them, then it becomes really, really tedious. And if we take the approach of writing it on a post-it note, or even creating a text file on our computer or something, then obviously the risk is very high if that file is somehow gone. So given all of this, I would assume that having using a password manager would be a reasonable approach. I would still advise maybe against that, if possible, for things like banking and really, like the law firms, networks and all that, because I feel, that's like more suitable for like cloud services that you use a lot of them, but not for the crown jewels of your data.
Right, good tips. So are you backing up your data? 65%, impressive. Yes, regularly. So let's talk about backups. 2 minutes or less, Jim, what do we need to know? Sorry to keep doing that to you, but I want to get as much in as we can today.
Yeah. 4 things about backups: the time when you back them up, how much or how long you keep the backups for, we'll call it retention, location of the backups, and the extent to what you back up. So quickly, time, as it implies, frequency and when is as critical as doing the backup. If you're backing up once a week and you lose data on a Monday and you're not backing up till Friday, then that's a lot of data that could be critical that you don't have. So that's significant. When we were less cloud-based, we used to run shadow copies every half an hour. So we were taking a copy of the data every half hour and then backing that up as well. So we were trying to be as proactive and as prolific as we could with the timing of the data, so that if somebody was in the middle of a document and 2 hours later something happened, that we could recover the bulk of it. So that, in terms of time, in terms of retention, partly that depends on your firm and the law society and the rules around it. How long are you legally required to keep the data? Is it 7 years? Is it 15 years? Putting it on OneDrive without, a backup of that is no good, because you delete something or somebody deletes something and you've got it for 30 days. So that's retention. So, do you keep, everything for 7 years? Do you keep monthly copies? Do you keep weekly copies? So all of that needs to be considered and is all important. The location, over the past, since prior to COVID, we have multiple locations. We back stuff up in the cloud. We back stuff up locally on separate servers, and then, back up within the servers. And then finally, the extent, what are you backing up? We don't back up operating systems because we can restore those without worrying about it, but we do back up data. We do back up profiles. We do back up, settings, so to speak, so that we can get things back to, current state if there is a loss of data or a device. Extent do we back up, and part of the extent of the backup, like the example I gave earlier of somebody backing up their iPhone onto their desktop, and we don't want to waste space, with all their personal pictures in the backup. But the other thing is where people are keeping their data, so that we know what to back up, and making sure that people aren't saving data on their desktops, or on a separate device, so that the firm data is backed up, and what we back up is what you need, not extra stuff, because it does cost money.
We could do an hour presentation on each one of these topics. How long does it take to recover from your data breach? Poll audience, never. 35%, variety across the board there. Ori, 2 minutes or less. Data breaches, what do we need to know and what do we do?
Okay, so I think when we are trying to secure our systems, right, the key thing we want to protect is our data. It could be client data, it could be our own internal data, and so on. And the most common attack method is something called phishing. What is phishing? Phishing is a way where we are trying to deceive you with either an email, sometimes SMS, sometimes even a voice call, and trying to make you do something which actually will support the attack. So the most common is the email phishing, right? So you get an email, it pretends to be something else. You say you have to urgently click here and do something. And then they try to, let's say, steal your credentials. Then these steps are basically a way to gain access to a particular asset, a computer, your phone, whatever. And then from there to go to the next step, which could be either stealing data or using a ransomware to lock the data, and then is basically the equivalent, the digital equivalent of kidnapping, right? Like I take your data and say, okay, you need to pay me money to release it back to you. I think it's very important to understand there's some cases which are really high profile data breaches. I think in the world of, in the legal world, probably one of the biggest one is the Panama Papers. There was this law firm in Panama, right? And the number of documents was very, very significant. I think is millions of documents. And it is believed that this was actually achieved by the starting of all this was basically by phishing And as James mentioned, it's always about the weakest link, right? If you have 20 people in the firm and if somebody sends an email to 20 of them, if only one clicks on it, actually the objective of this person who's attacking you was likely achieved. So I think at the end, we always need to remember that everything we do is about how do we protect the data, and avoiding the phishing is one of the key components here. I think the challenge is that even though this is going on for years and there's a lot of technologies to protect us, there's also improvement on the attack side, right? So, so as Google or Microsoft Office 365 or whatever, they come up with ways to blacklist these things or the domains they come from, the attackers come with more and more sophisticated ways. And today, one of the biggest new technologies used for this is generative AI. Things like ChatGPT allow them to write more convincing stories when they contact you. So the key thing to always understand is that we have to be very vigilant, very attentive to what is coming to us, because attackers can pretend to be somebody else. They can be, let's say we're dealing with real estate, they can pretend to be buyers, they can pretend to be banks, and typically the first warning sign is when something is urgent, right? You have to do it right now, and then most likely, I mean, I don't know, you can say that in the work life, everything is urgent, but usually a scam is based on, giving you a sense of urgency. So we need to be really aware to that part.
It can come from colleagues too, right? You think
Yeah. So
this is a lawyer I've worked with before, or you think this is my boss, and it's not.
Right. So I think today the other thing we need to understand, right, that because of social media, because of the fact that the firm may have a website and it lists everybody there, it's very easy for an attacker to pretend to be somebody else, and then depending on the culture you have, right? If the boss is like very authoritative, nobody wants to question him, this is an email from the boss, and then they will act on it. So definitely this is a very significant risk. So we need to always, I think we always need to question the things that do not make sense, right? Like if something is a bit fishy, then okay, it doesn't look real, rather than just say, I don't want to get in trouble, I'll do it. It's better to always question. And really, we all, because the threats landscape is changing all the time, there are going to be new things. There are new ways. Today it's possible to clone your voice, right? If somebody's just like listening in on this call, they can train a model of each one of our voices, and then they can easily create, call one of our colleagues and so on. Okay, so I think the main message to me would be, how do we stay abreast of the evolving landscape, learn about it, but mostly always understand that the nature of the internet is like all the crooks in the world are in your backyard and they're knocking on your door, right? There's no way for you to hide from that. So
that phishing attempt seemed a little too fishy. All right, look, Shannon's back. Amazing. 1 hour is gone just like that. I can't believe it. Welcome back, Shannon.
It goes by so quickly, doesn't it? And so I just want to thank Ori and Jim again for joining Russell on the panel today. That was really insightful. And I know this is very important to the legal profession, but I know any organization can benefit from this. I know an audience member mentioned they're in the medical industry and are joining us today. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and just want to thank all of our audience members as well for your participation today. We really appreciate it. And looks like we have time for maybe one last question just before we sign off today. So we are going to go to our audience question, that is, would VPN router attached to the laptop be helpful when one is in the courtroom or hotel?
Yeah, so I think we addressed that. So definitely that is going to be helpful, right? Because it reduces the risk of the ability to eavesdrop or to attack you in any way.
Yeah, okay. Great question.
Great, thanks so much again for clarifying that. So that's all the time we have today. We do very much appreciate all your feedback and all your participation today. So thanks again to everyone.